Welcome. This is episode 10 of the Heal In Gift of Love. I will be reading Robert Ingraham's article, long essay on the anti-slavery American founders centered around Alexander Hamilton. The music playing is Brahms' Fourth Symphony. And I'm gonna get right to it. Okay. Manhattan's Struggle for Human Freedom Against the Slave Power of Virginia by Robert Ingraham, April 20th, 2015. The Constitution, Part 2. This follows the piece where it goes on in terms of how close Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, who was the leading abolitionist and insisted at the Constitutional Convention that we must not compromise with the slave power. Well, all of these men around Washington came together over the campfires of war. In 1774, after the British government closed the port of Boston, a committee is formed under John Jay's leadership to organize a new revolutionary government for New York. The New York Provisional Congress. Morris, that's Gouverneur Morris, and Livingston are elected as representatives to the new legislature, and John Jay is the first delegate chosen to the new Continental Congress in Philadelphia. In 1776, the New York Provisional Congress, at the urging of Jay and Morris, authorized their representatives in Philadelphia to vote for independence. Robert Livingston serves on the Committee of Five, together with Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and John Adams, which drafts the final version of the Declaration of Independence. Later that year, Jay and Morris author a new constitution for New York State. Let me repeat. Later that year, John Jay and Gouverneur Morris author a new constitution for New York State, and they were both committed to ending slavery in the United States of America and ending it in New York State as soon as possible. Something that should have been done all over the young republic, and we would have saved ourselves a lot of hardship and calamity. Things that are still not resolved in any shape or form whatsoever. Just look at the rioting this past summer, and whether you liked it or not, it represented a genuine desire to just rip the system down because those people feel that they've been completely shafted, and maybe they have been, but I don't know. I'm not so sure that rioting in that way is an adequate response. It may be a necessary response in order to get to where we begin to talk to each other about it, but I'm not even sure about that. In 1776, the New York Provisional Congress, at the urging of Jay and Morris, authorized their representatives in Philly to vote for independence. Livingston serves on the Committee of Five, drafting the Declaration of Independence. That's Franklin, Jefferson, Sherman, and John Adams. And Jay and Morris author a new constitution for New York State. Elections are held to form a new state government. Jay is elected Chief Justice. Livingston is elected Chancellor, and their ally, Philip Schuyler, is barely defeated for governor by George Clinton. From 1781 to 1783, Gouverneur Morris, together with Robert Morris, are the vital leaders in the reorganizing of the nation's finances and staving off national bankruptcy, and together they found the Bank of North America. Now, this is before the Constitution, remember. This is during the period of the Articles of Confederation, and there was a weak and fragile government, and there was the danger of the United States being re-invaded by the British and a reconquest taking place, or a conquest taking place. We can't really say that they've ever conquered us, but you may be tempted upon examination of the evidence to consider that the invisible empire of finance centered in London, with Wall Street as a junior partner, well, the Trojan horse of Wall Street has insidiously taken over from Main Street and replaced the interests of the American broad spectrum of the working and middle classes, the people who produce and make things happen. The underclass, the poor, well, they always should have a say, but I would argue that what's happened is that the productive classes have been deliberately and terribly and thoroughly attacked and pushed to the point where they just voted for Donald Trump as if they realized the plane they were on had been hijacked and they were storming the cabin, the pilot's cabin, to take down the terrorists. In other words, Americans began to feel as if they were being held hostage by a terrible criminal. And they felt the need to just bum rush the pilot's cabin and take over, or to rush and take over from this terrorist, these bankers, these financiers that have basically made it so, with their machinations, it all seems to be so free, and as if it just happened. It just, it doesn't happen like it does. The concentration of wealth in the way that it's occurred does not happen by accident. It should be obvious with anybody. With anybody, that kind of accumulation of wealth, to have $100 billion in wealth, $150 billion, this is not justified. Or if it is justified, what is the justification? And that's a long discussion. But when people en masse are struggling to just barely get by, that they could barely hope to ever afford to own their own home, and they're barely scraping by paying rent and for their used car, and barely getting by, and for the mass of people to be in that category, whereas then there's a small group that's not just worth, we don't really have a problem with someone worth 10 or 50 or 100 million or 500 million or even $1 billion. But this idea that where the things have become so distorted because of the very low interest rates, the zero interest rates essentially that were made, the easy credit that was made available for Wall Street, for the insiders to take advantage of the system. It really didn't suit or help the American middle class or working class. It actually affected negatively their holdings in comparison to the 1% and the 10%. Now, let us return to the essay, because this is what I promised you. So what we have here is that Gouverneur Morris and Robert Morris from 1781 to 83 are the leading leaders in reorganizing the nation's finances, and they found the Bank of America, North America. John Jay, from 1779 to 1782, served as ambassador to Spain, and then at the request of Benjamin Franklin, John Jay proceeds to Paris to aid Franklin, whose efforts are being sabotaged by John Adams in securing the final peace treaty which ends the war. Part 2, the Constitution. The continuing lie surrounding the U.S. Constitution is that Alexander Hamilton played a minor role at the Constitutional Convention and had little input into the final document. The truth is that there would have been no Constitution without Hamilton. He was the initiator of the project and almost single-handedly responsible for convening of the convention in the summer of 1787 and afterwards. Hamilton was the driving force for ratification in 1788. In addition, he intervened in two crucial and decisive ways at the convention itself. His campaign from 1783 to 1787 to replace the Articles of Confederation is well known, and the details will not be repeated here except to emphasize his role in initiating the Annapolis Convention, which met on September 12, 1786, and ended 2 days later with Alexander Hamilton's authored Annapolis Resolution calling for the convening of a national convention in Philadelphia in May 1787 to be attended by all the states. This was Hamilton's project from the beginning. The Philadelphia Convention opened with the presentation of the Virginia Plan, a document which emanated from James Madison. Madison's proposal a mess, particularly in the extreme weakness of the presidency and the judiciary, which was extremely dangerous in the face of the dangers posed by European oligarchical and monarchical tyrannies that had an aim to divide the United States against itself, and the British nearly did so with the Confederacy that they organized through the Freemasonic Lodge based in Charleston that the British set up in 1801. Scottish Rite from the Freemasonic 32nd degree Freemasonry centered there. It was used as the base by which to form the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was the secret society spinoff of Freemasonry that was then used to create the Confederacy. It didn't just happen overnight. This happened over a period of 2 generations, going back to 1801, the secessionist instigation of the dismemberment of the United States by means of British intelligence support for secession on both sides of every issue to keep the whole thing polarized. So the Philadelphia Convention opened with a Virginia Plan, weak president. Madison had no intent built into his plan. There was no preamble of the Constitution type intent to promote the general welfare. In other words, to promote the well-being, welfare, and the pursuit of happiness for the entirety of the population. All right, so even worse, the Virginia proposal was followed several days later by the New Jersey Plan, a rewarmed version of the Articles of Confederation. The grim choice between some version of these two bad alternatives would have been inevitable, but on 17 June 1787, to the rescue comes Alexander Hamilton. He met with George Washington and convinced him to turn over the entirety of the next day's agenda at the Constitutional Convention to only one speaker, Alexander Hamilton himself. On June 18th, 1787, Hamilton spoke uninterrupted for six hours, presenting his own vision for the new government. Now, conventional historians almost universally deride this intervention, falsely characterizing his proposal as the British plan, despite the fact that it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the British government, and claiming that his speech had no support and little effectiveness. Au contraire, through his sheer will and the brilliance of his arguments, Hamilton transformed the entire nature of the gathering. From the moment of Hamilton's speech, the New Jersey Plan was dead, and the Nationalists gained the ascendancy in the convention. The battle then became one to improve upon the Virginia Plan, to transform it into the basis for a sovereign republic. Shortly after his speech, Hamilton left the convention for most of the rest of the summer. Again, historians point to this as evidence of Hamilton's pick at the supposed lack of support for his proposal, but a major reason that Hamilton absented himself from most of the convention was due to his status. New York State had sent 3 delegates, but 2 of them, allied with George Clinton, withdrew when they discovered that the convention intended to overthrow the Articles of Confederation. Without them, the New York delegation did not have a quorum and thus lost its vote. Hamilton's official position had been reduced, according to the rules of the convention, to that of a mere observer. This is why at the end of the convention, Washington stated that the Constitution had been signed by 11 states and Colonel Hamilton, New York not having a valid vote and Rhode Island boycotting the convention. 2 of them allied. Well, I think I'll stop there. That's 15 minutes. We'll follow up If anybody has any suggestions about how to handle questions or to put more interest into the presentation, please email me, pdhinton@gmail.com. P as in Paul, D as in David, HINTON @gmail.com. Thank you.